Welcome to the Neighborhood Law Center. I'm your host, Melvin Burruss. We have today our guest, Don Gathers, and we're lucky to have him on today. Welcome, Don.
Thank you.
Could you tell our audience, give us all this little background about you, about yourself, so they can understand when you start speaking where you're coming from?
Okay. Been in the Charlottesville area now some just short of 10 years. Married, family, co-founder of the local chapter of the Black Lives Matter movement here in Charlottesville. Been in activism and in advocacy really all of my life. I have a strong background in unionism and union work. Chaired the Blue Ribbon Commission on race memorials in public spaces that you sit on that board with me, and dealing primarily with what to do with the Confederate statues that litter the downtown landscape here. And just been trying to give a voice to the voiceless ever since.
Okay. Well, that's great, because we need people in the community to step up for those who are silent and quiet in the community for one reason or another.
Right.
So what was your reaction to the verdict, the George Floyd verdict that happened yesterday?
George Floyd was the young man who was murdered at the hands of the police officers, most directly Derek Chauvin, by the movement of placing his knee directly on his neck while he was subdued and handcuffed, face down on the pavement. He stayed and held him in that position for some 9 minutes and 29 seconds. Even though Mr. Floyd consistently cried out that he couldn't breathe, that his stomach was in pain, he even cried out for his mother. And when you see a grown man crying out for his mother, that's a signal of real distress. Other officers, 3 other officers that have been charged in this crime, stood by and watched and wouldn't allow spectators to intervene. It was horrific. It was sickening and troubling to watch that unfold. And we as Americans literally saw a man murdered at the hands of the police right in front of our eyes.
That's true. Everything you say is true. But what was your reaction to the verdict itself? Now, the verdict was, could you go over the verdict?
The verdict was guilty on 3 separate charges. The top of those charges was second-degree manslaughter. And I wish that I could say that I was elated and overjoyed, but it was more a sense of relief than anything else. Because even though we had all the visual evidence that anyone should ever need in a case or an instance like this, yeah, I've seen it go the other way too many times, especially when it deals with people of color.
Do you get any confidence in the fact that they tell us there was a diverse jury? I never saw them, but the jury was diverse, and they came to an unanimous decision of all 3 counts that we were referring to.
Yeah.
So you get any confidence in that
No.
justice can be had?
No, they got it right this time. We still need to see this play out in other cases, in other instances and circumstances, because these situations are evolving and ongoing. I mean, even at the time of the verdict, there was another young lady in Columbus, Ohio, who was shot down and killed at the hands of the police, a 16-year-old teenage little girl. So these situations continue to evolve and they continue to happen. So I wish that I could give them a pat on the back, but they only did what they should have done. They did what all of us were expecting them to do, or at least hoping that they would do. So I can't say I give them kudos for doing their job. They did what they should have done all along.
One thing I take out of this, that the young lady who took out her camera, had the courage to take out her camera and to tape this incident.
Yeah.
As we're saying, murder. And that's one of the reasons why justice could not be denied.
Yeah. Even though she was repeatedly being told to stop filming, being told to put it down, to being told to walk away, she held her ground. She knew her rights. She knew that she wasn't violating anything constitutionally, and she kept recording. And if anyone deserves kudos, it's her.
It's encouraging to other young people and adults also that if you see something that's wrong, take out that that phone that we've been carrying around and in our hand 24/7 and put it to use. Document.
Really, at this point, we encourage citizens anytime they see any interactions with the police and the citizenry, if you can, if you have time, if you have a moment, stop and record it, because it provides so much of a safety net for that individual who's being detained, who's being arrested, who's being harassed. It just gives them some cushion, some fallback security.
Documentation. Oh, why does this continue to happen? Have you thought about that? You know, have you sat in your room after many times, I guess, in conversations or just sitting alone thinking, why is this continuing to happen?
It's the ingrained history of policing, I think, in this country, going back to the slave catchers. It's the system that they're in, and it's the system that's broken. And I take that back. The system isn't necessarily broken. It's doing exactly what it was intended to do in regards to black and brown people in this country. And that's why I don't feel like the system can be reformed. It can't be fixed. It's got to be imploded and rebuilt all over from scratch. They like to say, well, you can't condemn the entire system for a few bad apples. Well, if the tree has as many bad apples as we've seen shaken out, then that tree is rotten from the core. So we need to cut the tree down and plant something different.
Well, police and law enforcement is a great value for all of us.
Yeah.
But as you said once before, there are some rogue cops that has infiltrated the police force.
Yeah.
What do we do about them?
The problem is that thin blue line. It's very rare, I mean extremely rare, that you hear one police officer say anything at all against another one. That's why it was so refreshing to see some of the police officers come forward in this particular trial to basically say what he did was improper. It wasn't right. That's not how they were trained. But that's not the norm. Typically, it's the actions seem to be, and are upheld of fellow officers. It's a fraternity it's tough for an outsider to crack.
It's encouraging that the police chief himself stood up and says, my man was wrong.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which is good, and I hope that filters down to all police chiefs and all of the police stations everywhere.
It makes you wonder.
Can't protect a bad apple.
It makes you wonder why we didn't hear more police chiefs come out and say, "Hey, that's not what we're here for. That's not what we do." It would have been great to hear policy or position statements from other chiefs all across the country saying, that's not us. That's not our job.
Well, how do you feel that police unions affect or the way police chiefs act and say?
I think in many instances, depending on the strength of the union, they can handcuff the administration, because some unions are extremely strong all across the country. I'm an advocate for when an individual is sued because of improper actions, they should take as much as they can from that individual, from their pension, if necessary, from the union that supports them, as opposed to the locality of the jurisdiction itself having to pay out that settlement. I think that if we can get that reversed and get that changed, I think you might see a difference in policing and in these particular situations. I think the numbers would start to head in a downward spiral significantly.
Hit them in their pockets.
Exactly.
That's when people start making a change.
Right.
What were your feelings prior to prior to the verdict coming out?
Uneasiness, unrest, the uncertainty certainly was there. And as much as I tried to make myself watch the trial, I couldn't. I just couldn't, because you just didn't know. I mean, 30 years ago, we saw the events of Rodney King. All of that was well documented. But when it went to trial, the officers were exonerated. And you just always have that fear in the pit of your stomach that it's going to or it can't happen again.
They have this George Floyd Justice Act floating around in Congress, U.S. Congress.
Yeah.
What is your take on that, and how do you think we can get the community and our elected officials to back that?
First of all, I don't understand the Republicans in Congress that are pushing back on it or trying to add additional pork to it just to get something that they want ramrodded through. Secondly, why did it take this for us to get to that point? It shouldn't have taken these types of actions with the George Floyd issue or the Breonna Taylor issue for us to have meaningful legislation that should already cover these types of situations. I'm happy that the folks in Congress stepped up and decided to actually put forth something meaningful, but that's the type of thing that should have already been in existence anyway.
Well, as you said before, historically, it wasn't going to happen.
Right.
Until some act happened. And that's how change comes. And it shouldn't be when some violent act happens. It should be, as you were saying before, let's talk about it. Let's discuss it. And so go ahead.
Well, I mean, we look at the issue going back, 70 years with Emmett Till. You fast forward to Medgar Evers, to Martin Luther King, to Malcolm X. I mean, there are things that should already be in place just based on the history of policing the black and brown people in this country. The lynchings that have taken place, the rebel rousing of the Ku Klux Klan. And it's very meaningful that the government moved very swiftly in this country to disband the Black Panther Party, but they have never taken any real action on the Klan. That's very telling in and of itself. So I'm happy that they're doing something. I'm saddened that it's taken another loss of life for them to do something.
Okay. We're halfway through the program. It's very interesting. I got involved. The time has gotten away from me. But this is the Neighborhood Law Center. I'm your host, Melvin Burruss, and our guest is Don Gathers, co-founder of Black Lives Matter and a community activist. You spoke about the George Floyd Justice Act and some things that the Republicans are pushing back on, which is one of them is immunity. Let's talk about that for a minute.
Qualified immunity, which prevents police individuals and agencies from being sued civilly for what amounts to criminal activity. Several states, including our own here in Virginia, are talking in the legislatures now about removing that cover. And I think that, as I was just speaking, as we start to unfold and remove some of these layers from the onion, and remove some of the protective covers that exist, I think that you'll see some of these those rogue police officers, those who are out there for intentions other than to protect and serve. I think that you'll start to see them have a change of heart, and at least, if not a change of heart, a change in the way that they actually do their jobs.
Especially if they know that they civilly they can be sued,
right?
And there is no municipality or state or county to pick up the tab for
Exactly.
them.
Exactly.
It's a good point. The other point is we were talking about is what happens with a rogue police when he goes from one jurisdiction to another. What should we do there?
There should be an existing database that exists not only in the state or in the localities, but all across the country, that it would indicate any time that there's an issue with a particular officer, that where the charges could rise to criminality, that information needs to be loaded into a database, because right now, if an individual has an issue in one locality, it's very simple for them to just move to another one with no retribution whatsoever. They just move freely from one location to the other, and the problem that they leave still exists. But they're clear and free to continue on with their lives and to continue building on their pension.
Yeah, we talk about background checks for carrying to buying a firearm. Yet some of these road cops are more dangerous than a firearm because they've killed so many people.
Oh yeah, and it's very telling that it takes you longer to get a cosmetology license than it does to train as a police officer. Something's wrong in that. That's a dichotomy that shouldn't exist. So we just need to look at the entire training that we give our officers. We saw the instance where the young lady killed Dante Wright because she said she thought that she had her taser. And this is an officer who's been on the force for 26 years and the former president of a police union. If she doesn't know at this point the difference between the grip and the feel of a taser and the grip of a Glock, there's something seriously wrong in the training that they're receiving.
Now that you mention it, I saw a picture of her, and her firearm was on her right side, and her taser was on her left side. So I'm not sure how you can go to your.
And it's my understanding that they're trained to put their weapon, their gun, on their dominant side, and put the taser on the other side.
The left side.
Yeah. So it's hard for me to be convinced that she didn't know what she was holding.
One thing that has puzzled me from the Supreme Court is police discretion, which I think is a major issue when you're dealing with bad policemen. Can you talk on that?
Well, you know, they've always given police discretion on how to handle certain instances. And many of these instances that they receive calls for, they're just not really equipped to deal with them. So let's just get that out there. But I mean, it goes up the line, even up through prosecutorial discretion, which in many instances, as we've seen through the history, has been unevenly handled. So when we talk about police discretion, they shouldn't have the discretion as to rather or not shoot first and then figure it out later. They should decide how best to deal with the situation as it presents itself and as it unfolds. And putting your hands on that weapon has to be the last option. That can't be the first thought. I mean, if you're pulling over somebody for expired tags, or because they have an air freshener hanging from their rearview mirror, why would you have to approach their car with your hand on your weapon? And you've immediately raised the level of tension in that interaction. Find out what's going on and then deal with the situation as it unfolds.
Well, you make a good point because, as you were saying earlier, we haven't brought it out, but the discretion is if it's a white person or if it's a black person.
Yeah.
What do I do?
Yeah.
Two different scenarios, which is unequal in justice, because if it's a black person, this is the way I'm going to handle it.
Yeah.
If it's a white person, this is the way I handle it. I saw on the Facebook recently where a white person pepper sprayed a cop, ran away from him, and the worst thing that happened to him is he got arrested.
Yeah, but he was taken alive.
But he was taken alive. Exactly.
The mass shooter, the young man who they arrested and took into custody, said he was hungry. They took him to Burger King. That doesn't happen to black folks. It just doesn't work out that way.
So we have to come to the point that this unequal justice when it's dealing with white folks and black folks.
Absolutely.
Just lay
Absolutely.
it out there and stop making excuses.
That's always been the case in this country. I mean, if you remember, even going back to the 3/5 compromise, they didn't even consider us humans. We were 60% of what they figured that they were. We were less valued than livestock, than cattle and horses. So I mean, that's just always been the mindset going back to the founding fathers, if you will, of this country.
Is there some way we can, or the Black Lives Matter, can interact with Senator Warren or our other senator on this bill? Or is it just because you're saying, well, the Democrats are all aboard? It's the Republicans that we're having a problem with?
Well, we have to stay after Senator Warner and Senator Kaine to make sure that they follow it and walk this thing through, and also do any and everything that they can to try to bring their Republican counterparts on board and make them. They have to see the necessity in this. They may not realize it and understand it, but they've got to see the importance of this type of legislation.
Well, all of them had a nice little press release. The president, Senator Warren, Senator Kaine, our state attorney general, had nice things to say. But what do we do to make sure that they don't forget about this incident, like most of them did about Rodney King?
We continue to hold them accountable. We continue to lobby, if you will. We continue to sit at their doorstep, make the phone calls, send the emails, and write letters. And don't let this leave the forefront of their mindset.
Okay. So we're out to the summarization now. Where do we go from here, or where do you feel we should be going from here?
We've got to remain vigilant and watchful, because as sad as it is for me to say it, we just have to be ready for the next instance that it happens. And unfortunately, the sad reality is it's going to happen again. And we've just got to be prepared to do whatever it takes to shout it down. Hatred continues to permeate this country, and we can't remain silent about it. Silence is essential, and we can't let anybody think that the mistreatment of black and brown people is okay, and especially that it's okay with black and brown people.
So what do we do here in Charlottesville, Central Virginia, I say, with Albemarle, Louisa, the city of Charlottesville, Orange? How do we be vigilant with the police officers?
Well, the first thing is we can't ever become complacent and think that can't happen here. Because in every community that it's happened in, they thought the same thing. So we've always got to be keenly aware that in the blink of an eye, any situation, any interaction can go left. So we've got to always be mindful of that. Again, as we talked about earlier, if you see an interaction and you have the opportunity and ability to do it, stop and record it. You might be protecting another citizen's life in doing so. And again, anytime that this happens, be prepared to march, to chant, to take to the streets, to make sure that the government, the city, the state, or whatever locality knows it's not acceptable. And we're not on board with this. And it's very telling that Colin Kaepernick took a knee about this very issue, about the issues of police brutality and police murders in the country. Derek Chauvin took a knee on George Floyd's neck. The similarities are eerie, but it can't be overlooked.
Okay, so where do you think? One thing has troubled me, and I guess the thing about it is the minimum training. Should that be a federal minimum training? People say minimum training. You were saying that a police officer's trained in less time than a cosmopolitan person or a person does here.
Right.
Should we have a federal minimum training that's governed by the federal government? And where's the federal government when it comes to reviewing police state?
Well, we get into some murky waters there, because now you're talking about possibly militarizing or federalizing local police departments. And I don't know that we want to do that. We certainly have to take a more concise and comprehensive look at the training that's being given, and rebrand and re-educate and rebuild that training module. But I don't know that we want to take the leap to federalizing that. that could really cause some sticky situations where you're under a military regime, if you will, once we get to that point. And I don't think that any locality would be interested in that. We 4 years ago, we saw tanks and AMRETs rolling through our streets, and it's not an easy feeling for anyone to stomach.
Well, that was because the government was giving them, the local police departments, all that weaponry, and they're sitting there. Now, what do we do with it?
Yeah.
So, again, I think direction has to come through the federal government, because if it doesn't, a good federal government, because if it doesn't, we're going to have what we have in the old South, or still in the South, where individual states make up their own rules and also have their own punishment. So, thank you for watching. This is Melvin Burruss of the Neighborhood Law Center. Please, if you have missed the show and you want to see it again, please go to neighborhoodlawcenter.com, and also go to YouTube. On YouTube, you can just type in Neighborhood Law Center and we'll pop up. But we want to thank Don for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
Interesting conversation and information that you gave us. Until next week, peace and God bless.